Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar on stage 3 of building a cyber defense in-depth strategy. If you don't know that, we're IT governance. I hope that won't come as a shock. We've been in the business of cybersecurity for some 20 odd years. ISO 27001 is where the business started, and it's still pretty solidly at the core of everything that we do, but we have a major training operation. We train delegates on professional cybersecurity and privacy skills. We're a Cyber Essential certification body. We're a CREST accredited penetration tester and incident responder. We're a PCI QSA. Pretty well anything to do with privacy and cybersecurity is IT governance. And ISO 27001 is kind of important. We'll come to that shortly because in the last 12 months, it's pretty well the fastest growing management system according to ISO surveys. As a group, GRC, which is the parent company of IT governance, covers the broad range of everything that is part of ensuring that an organization is able to protect its core assets, comply with a range of regulations, and thrive in an increasingly difficult business environment. Everything's designed to join up in a way that enables organizations to pick and put together the components of a successful security and privacy compliance structure that suits you as a business. I've been doing this for about as long as IT governance has existed. I'm Alan Calder. I'm your host for this afternoon, and this webinar, which is going to look at ISO 27001 as part, primarily looking at cybersecurity defense in depth, is going to be about 40 or 45 minutes of me talking. I'm sure that in the process you'll find that you have questions that you want to ask. Please do type them into the Q&A or the chat function in the GoToWebinar box, which you'll find on your screen. It's the way you logged into this webinar. Do type any questions that you've got into that. You'll find that you're on mute at the moment, centrally controlled, and that's because we found over the years that that deals with a whole lot of background noise and other problems and challenges that there might be. But we do like questions, so put them in the chat function or the Q&A session, and when we come to the end of the webinar, I'll pick out whatever questions there may be. I'll share the question with you and then answer it as fully as I possibly can. So we're going to talk briefly a recap of the threats facing organizations today. We're going to look at what the third stage in a cyber defense in-depth model might be, and then we're going to go into some depth into ISO 27001 and how it fits into a cyber defense in-depth model, a brief look at some of the policies and procedures and how those relate to keeping out of regulatory, contractual and compliance challenge, a brief overview of impact of supply chain management, because risk in the supply chain is another major area for all organizations, audit and certification, and then kind of quick look at practical solutions for implementing a cyber defense in-depth strategy. So for those of you who've been on or attended these webinars in the past, the recap is simply going to be a recap. For those of you who come to today fresh, the logic of a cyber defense in-depth strategy is that cyber security is a really complicated subject. So if you think about it from a threat landscape, what's going on in terms of who might be threatening you and your business, the attack surface, what those attackers might be looking to exploit, the compliance landscape surrounding that attack surface, and then who you can turn to for support. The threat landscape has become extremely professional. Cyber criminals are very sophisticated. We see in the cyber crime world specialization. We see people who specialize in writing malware, others who specialize in distributing it. You get malware as a service that's been around for some time. You get access brokers who will provide access to target organizations for a price. All of that enables the cybercrime ecosystem to grow and thrive. And of course, It's an area in which the return on investment can be very significant. The cost of carrying out a cybercrime is minimal. It's the time of the criminals. There's no hardware. There's no other real investment. Criminals have got their laptops, but mostly they can leverage what's going on the internet. And many of the serious organized crime gangs have nation-state protection or support. And many of them, in times of trouble, get involved in doing, in a grey, can-be-denied way, things that their protecting states might want them to do. And this is true, of course, of Russia, of Iran, of North Korea. It's also true, unquestionably, of China. It's also true, unquestionably, of Britain, France, America, and all countries. All countries, one way or another, have a formal way of dealing with challenges in cyberspace, and to one extent or another, they will have plausibly deniable ways of dealing with those as well. Certainly in places like Russia, North Korea, Iran, that's far more widespread. The criminal elements are much more overt, but it doesn't change the fact that if, as a private sector organization or as a charity or a public sector organization, you're getting on with doing your business, you're grappling not only with cyber criminals, you're grappling with cyber criminals operating under the protection of, and quite often able to draw on, the technology of a host nation state. So increasingly sophisticated cyber criminals, serious organized crime, backed by nation state warfare, cyber warfare, increasingly widespread, and the digitization program, particularly over the last couple of years, migration to cloud, has changed the opportunities very dramatically for organizations, for cyber criminals. The speed with which many organizations went into the cloud meant that cloud configurations weren't properly thought through, weren't secure. Digital program rollouts didn't necessarily have appropriate policies and procedures, staff training, appropriate security configurations. So all of those become part of a really interesting attack surface when attackers look at how they might go after your valuable assets. Weaknesses and vulnerabilities in people, in process, and in technology are the things that cyber criminals are looking for. And the more you invest in technology, in firewalls, in security incident event management, in anti-malware software, in DLP, and all of those kind of technologies, the more they focus on weaknesses and vulnerabilities in people and in procedure. If you don't have a proper procedure around how to manage password changes or how to manage changes in job roles, how to manage what people do in social media, what you have is opportunities for cyber criminals to exploit a vulnerability. So weaknesses and vulnerabilities is the first major key area that interests cyber attackers. The other area they're really interested in is what's happening in your supply chain or the supply chain of which you're a part, and what they can do in the managed service provider marketplace. They understand perfectly well that if you can get into a managed service provider, you can hack their systems, you can thereby get into the systems of all of their customers coming from what looks like a secure and credible environment. So cyber criminals are very alert to the opportunities to make what I would call a one-to-many attack. You break into one system, it enables you to attack many, many others. And all of that's facilitated by the fact that most organizations have inadequate governance, risk management, and compliance processes. Many boards still have directors who are not thoroughly aware of what's going on from a cybersecurity perspective. They don't understand what questions they should ask. They don't know what good looks like. They don't know how to determine which risks to manage, which ones don't. And in today's recessionary environment, they even think that cybersecurity expenditure is discretionary. They don't yet understand that in today's environment, there's only three things that are certain, and that's death, taxes, and cybercrime. And that means that you frankly have to be looking right now, not at how do you save money on cybersecurity, but where do you invest again? How do you double down on your cybersecurity protection to deal with the range of risks which unquestionably in this recession, as in all others, will increase. Cyber criminals know that there are organizations who will delay patching, who will delay updating systems, who won't spend what they should be spending on staff training, and they will know that the opportunity to be successful is there. Remember, cyber criminals have to be successful just once in attacking your system. You have to be successful 100% of the time in keeping them out. So that's kind of part of the logic behind cyber defense in depth. If you give them multiple things they've got to get through, multiple ways in which you deal with protection, you increase the likelihood of your own survival. So you've got a very porous attack surface. You've got Internet of Things making it even more porous, and then you've got regulators determining that there are things they should be doing in order to make directors do what they should be doing. So you have proliferating regulatory and compliance frameworks. You have GDPR in the UK and the EU. You have the US saying, you know, we need to be doing something at a federal level, which kind of is as good as GDPR in the EU because we want to trade with the EU. You've got India, Brazil, many other countries looking at the EU's GDPR and saying that's clearly a gold standard from a privacy compliance point of view. You've got network and information security directives, you've got regulation in the EU, in the UK, in the US around critical national infrastructure, around incident reporting. All of those are areas in which regulators, lawmakers are focusing and saying, actually, there's no point in relying on companies to deal with these things because they'll often sweep it under the carpet if they can. We're going to make laws about how stuff has to be dealt with. And so when, as a management, you look around and say, so how do we do this? Who's going to help us do it? There's a global shortage of some 2.7 million cybersecurity professionals. There's a huge shortage of privacy professionals. Who are we going to get to help us? And there's a lot of small companies in the market who maybe do one thing. They offer a single solution, maybe around staff training or something. There are companies who've got a good collection of hardware and some software, but you need all of that. So you need to try and find organizations who have a comprehensive range. Organizations like IT governance, which can deal across the broad range of every single thing organizations need, because that proliferation of point solutions makes your life harder. You've got to find ways in which you can take disparate elements which are not designed to fit together and fit them together in a way that doesn't give you more vulnerabilities. You can't rely on cyber insurance, even if you've just discovered it and think it's something you should be doing, because of three things, really. The number of companies providing cyber insurance is going down. They don't like the exposure. It's cost them a lot already. The size of premiums is going up. We've seen premiums go up between 25 and 150% over the course of the last 9 months. And it's increasingly difficult in any case to get cyber security insurance, because cyber insurers are saying, well, are you secure? And there are many organizations who are going along to their brokers and saying, we need insurance. And the broker saying, yep, we can sort that out for you. Fill in this questionnaire. And the organization or its technical team go, but we can't answer all of this stuff, or we're not doing the stuff we're meant to be doing. So we can't get insurance. So being able to rely on having cybersecurity as a mitigation of the cost of a major breach is really difficult to do. So what do? Cybercrime damages going up 15% per annum, ransomware attacking a device every 2 seconds by 2031. It's simply bad now, and it's going to get worse and worse and worse. So what do you do? And the answer is, I'm going to leave the slide for you to look at in your own time. We'll circulate the slides with the recording of the webinar in due course. And you can have a look in more detail at the nature of the threat landscape, the actors, the different types of cyber criminals, the vectors through which they attack, the different types of threat which they're deploying, and the different targets they're after. And remember, with cyber criminals, they're not attacking you, they're attacking a vulnerability. If you didn't run the most recent updates, and that means you haven't patched vulnerabilities in whatever your operating system is, that means they can get in, they look for the vulnerabilities, they exploit them. So what do? And the answer is you build defense in depth. You recognize that, well, first of all, if you think you haven't been penetrated, you're not paying attention, you haven't been looking. Most organizations have a number of breaches of one sort or another every month. and those breaches where somebody says, I clicked on a link that I shouldn't, that's a cyber breach. It takes you time and money, even if you deal with it quickly. It takes you time and money to deal with. So what does cyber defense in depth look like? Well, there are really five levels to it, five elements. The first is about detecting attacks when they come in. And of course, you've got firewalls in place, you've got spam filters. It's doing all of that. But you need to be detecting much more carefully where you have a vulnerability. And where you have vulnerabilities, because it's vulnerabilities that you're interested in rather than just the inflood of different attack types, is you have vulnerabilities in two areas. And the first is in your internet-facing assets, and the second is in your human being. So you need to be running vulnerability scans, and you need to be running phishing training on a regular basis to make sure that you're keeping those vulnerabilities closed. You need to be deploying protective measures. Stuff will get through. People will not recognize that they've clicked on a link. So you need to have a good incident response process, which is trained, rehearsed, and trained. You need to have cyber essentials, which makes sure, particularly if you go with cyber essentials plus, which makes sure that you've got in place basic technical security controls. You need to have in your IT team basic cybersecurity and privacy skills and competence. So those are kind of basic areas of building protection. But here at level 3, we're talking about managing cyber risk. We're recognizing that you can't deploy huge amounts of money equally across the whole business, not only because that's expensive, but because you don't need to defend every part of the business in the same way. You've got some parts of the business where you haven't got much exposure. You've got other parts of the business where you've got lots of exposure. So your bank accounts, your personal data records, your customer databases, those, for instance, are really valuable data. They're valuable to you. They're valuable to a cyber criminal. However, a particular mobile device which has got no information on it, you might not care particularly whether it breaks or not. It could be a pain in the neck if it does, but you might not care. And at this kind of third level, what you're doing is you're saying, right, we've got some basic defenses in place. We're able to protect ourselves at a kind of straightforward level. Now we need to think very carefully about our core assets and our core defenses. How are we going to make sure that the crown jewels are protected? And in future webinars, we're looking at what you do after that. But this one really is about that stage 3, the management, an intensive approach that recognizes that risk assessment, identifying where your risks are inside the organization, putting appropriate controls in place around those risks, and then managing them is at the heart of an increasingly robust cyber defense in-depth system. So we'll look at response and recovery later, but the kind of questions you're going to be asking yourself is, how do we, in a small organization or even a more complex organization, how do we manage cybersecurity risks in a way that's not just implementing those basic controls? How do we embed our controls, the mitigations we've decided on, in our own organization and across our supply chain? How do we make sure that things are working as we want them to work? We're not just relying on chance and hope. How do we tell our customers, our stakeholders, our investors, our partners, our suppliers that they can rely on us for being here over the long run? How do they know we're not like the American medical records company simply going to disappear because we have a cyber attack that we are unable to deal with? How do we demonstrate to a customer where we've signed a contract saying we will protect their data or we'll process data in line with their requirements as the controller? How do we demonstrate that we've done that? What processes do we have in place to deal with that? So management is about answering those questions, about answering an even bigger range of questions like, are we adequately insured? When did we last test our recovery procedures? Do we know whether if we have a breach, our recovery procedures are going to work? Are our recovery procedures still built about the current levels of device and software we have installed? Is our information security awareness such as we have it effective? Do we do a risk assessment? Do we know what risks we're dealing with? Or have we simply said to our support team, our IT team, make us safe, and then been upset when the way they make us safe is they lock everything down? Because that's what IT teams do if you don't identify where risks really are. What are the top risks? What are the things that, as an organization, you should be concentrating your cyber risk management investment on. And that's really what ISO 27001 is about doing. If you've not come across ISO 27001 before, it's a management system standard, just like ISO 9001. It focuses on information security rather than on quality, but the logic is exactly the same. The logic is that you will have a policy, you'll have a set of procedures, you'll audit compliance with those. It's a management system where the standard is built on best practice put together by a committee drawn from people with wedges of experience from around the world, available for a small sum of money. You can buy the standard for typically 100 or 200 pounds. The effort has to go into how you implement what you do to comply with it, how you get that audited. But all such standards, an ISMS, Information Security Management System, even more than most, is built around the idea that you need to recognize, enumerate, and comply with specific laws that might be relevant to your organization or to your sector. What ISO 27001 enables you to do is build a single way to comply, and in that single set of procedures, comply with multiple laws and regulations. And that's useful if you're just an ordinary organization trying to comply with GDPR, for instance. It's also useful if you're in a regulated sector like critical national infrastructure or finance, or you're trading in multiple markets with different laws. You don't want to have a set of compliance requirements that meet the FCA handbook and a different set of compliance requirements to meet GDPR rules. You want one set of requirements which can be audited by multiple people and meet all of those kind of requirements. You want to be able to meet contractual compliance requirements, like PCI. PCI is a contractual compliance requirement to process payment cards. Many customers require levels of security around processing their data. If you're dealing with a data controller, you're a processor, you'll be required to deal with data in a way, personal data in a way that meets their requirements. So all of those are things that you want to be able to deal with through a single management system, and building an ISMS is the logical way to go about doing that. And the benefits are kind of therefore obvious. It follows on from doing those kind of things. You achieve multiple legal compliance requirements in a single hit. You don't have to have silos of different ways of doing the same thing, which conflict and create expense and administrative uncertainty. You don't need to have different audits carried out across different areas of the business, because you can just have your ISMS audited, and by that means demonstrate compliance. That saves you money and disruption. You can demonstrate to customers and to others that you're meeting contractual requirements. You can, as a management, satisfy yourself that actually you're doing what you should be doing. This is not just your IT or security team saying we're secure. You have an independent organization do an audit. You have a report that tells you where you have non-conformances, whether things are going as they should do. Enables you to improve security through the business. You get people involved in it, understanding what they should be doing. The role of human beings in corporate security is significant. And the more people understand their role, they understand how to comply, all of that helps. And of course, all of that adds up to you not having breaches, you winning more business, you having a more compliant business, and that adds up to growing prestige and long-term success, particularly in an environment where you're dealing with recession. The last thing any organization can afford in the middle of a recession is suddenly having to deal with a cyber breach that you weren't planning on. So to take at a fairly high level, the Irish Health Service is now 50 million euros into recovery from a ransomware attack. They've also spent, I think at last count, 9 million euros on putting in place the defenses that would have stopped the ransomware attack in the first place. So 59 million euros is what they're having to spend to do the work of 9 million euros. It's a simple message. Spend the money now to make sure you're secure. It avoids having to spend an awful lot more on dealing with the consequences of a breach. In addition to which, you'll still have to spend what you should have spent now to get yourself secure, because, to be frank, cyber criminals know perfectly well that when you've been breached, they can breach you again. You're not going to get yourself to an appropriate level of security very quickly, so they'll come back, they'll have another go. And we see instances where cyber criminals going after known vulnerabilities, a single organization can have 2 or 3 attacks within the same 2 or 3 hours from 2 or 3 different cyber criminals. So that's the kind of reality. You've got to be dealing right now, today, if you haven't, with building a cyber defense in depth. So ISO 27001, as I said, it protects your reputation from the consequences of not being able to respond to a security threat. Suppliers and stakeholders want to know you're going to be around for the long term. It enables you to avoid regulatory fines. And, you know, British Airways is just one example of organizations where a 5-week gap between an iframe on a website and the website enabled attackers to get behind it, lay their hands on millions of personal records, led to a significant fine, huge expenditure, huge investment of effort by British Airways dealing with something which they didn't think was a problem. They thought they were compliant. So you can avoid fines, you can avoid disruption, you reduce costs managing information security effectively. You know, you do in a recession, you want to be able to increase the level of your security. You want to be completely on top of it, but you don't want to be wasting money. And ISO 27001 helps you do that. It helps you improve structure and focus. It reduces also the need for frequent audits, because again, we certainly find that in a recession, customers spend more time making sure that suppliers are secure than they might otherwise, because they're very alive to the possibility of a hole in their supply chain. They're trying to manage their risk as well as. So how do you implement ISO 27001? Obviously, you go buy a copy of the standard. That's a couple £100. And just in parenthesis, the standard is in the process of being updated. So the current version of the standard is the 2013 version. 2022 version is due to be published sometime in the next 3 to 6 weeks. It doesn't have very many changes when we last looked at it from the current standard, but there is probably a 2-year transition period between the point at which it's published and the point at which you would need to comply with it. So there's no reason to hold off, but go buy a copy of the standard. The next thing you do is you create an implementation team. You put together from within the organization somebody senior, somebody from the business, somebody maybe from the technical team, but they're going to lead the implementation. This should never be an IT project. This is a business project. The business benefits are significant. You want IT supporting it, but you want the business brought into it right from the beginning, because the business salespeople, for instance, are going to benefit really disproportionately from the effectiveness of this. So create an implementation team, give them some training, make sure they understand what they're doing. Then appoint a project manager and develop an implementation plan. This is the point at which, if you're looking for outside help, you might bring in an outside consultant who's done it lots of times before, who can help you put a plan together. You're looking to create a plan which will cover a 3 to 12-month period, depending on the size of the organization, and which will enable you to, in a joined-up, controlled way, implement an ISMS information security management system. You'll determine what roles and responsibilities should be at this point. You will put in place continual improvement processes. You've got to recognize that at the point that you start implementing an ISMS, you'll already be doing quite a lot of the things that ISO 27001 would expect you to do, and you're going to document them and you're going to improve on them. There will be other gaps which you'll identify and you'll want to build on that, and over time you'll continually improve what you're doing. And then you need to be building awareness internally. You want all your staff buying into the project, you want customers and others buying in. So there's an awareness program which you kick off at the second step of ISO 27001 implementation. The third step, and there are 9 steps in this, this is a 9-step process I first wrote about probably 9-10 years ago. We've deployed it in thousands or hundreds of organizations. We've sold thousands of copies of the books. It's a process that really works. Step 3 is initiating the information security management system. It's agreeing a top-level information security policy, a couple of page document which says this is the organization's approach to information security. It's signed off by top management. It sets the scene and direction for implementing information security inside the organization. You also at this point determine what your documentation structure will be, because, you know, like any management system, you're going to have procedures and you're going to have some records which track how work instructions or procedures have been implemented. Many of those records will be in the form of computer logs, but you need to think through how you're going to put that together. And that's part of the job of your implementation team. So 3 steps are really what you might call working out how to make a good start. You don't want to go pell-mell into it because you'll suddenly go, oh, we forgot this, we forgot that. So make a good start, first 3 steps in implementing ISO 27001. The 4th step, having decided on how you're going to do it, is really then to finalize the actual scope of the management system. This is kind of where it starts getting a little bit complicated, because it's easy if you're a small business with 20 or 50 employees. The scope's going to be the whole of the business. Scope basically is what do I draw a line around where I know who the management team is, and we know who is outside of the management system, and we have to govern our relationships with them. It gets more complex the larger you get as an organization. If you're a group made up of multiple entities, are you going to have a management system which covers all of them, or is it going to cover one of them? If you have many departments or divisions, if you're international, all of those elements in determining what the scope of the management system should be. But it's a critical step, this 4th step, because unless you know which bits of the organization you're protecting, you can't work out how you're going to go about protecting them. Once you've decided on the scope of your management system, you can decide on the scope of your implementation project. Obviously, it's going to be the scope of the management system, but you kind of want to look at your implementation team and go, actually, can we do this? And you might say, well, the scope is going to be the whole group. We've got 10,000 employees in 50 different countries, and then you look at your implementation team and competences and go, actually, we can't do this. It's too hard. Which are the key businesses we need to focus on? And you may shrink the scope so that your implementation team's capability matches that. But you want to make sure that scope of the management system and scope of the management team, of the implementation team, are aligned in a way that enables the project to proceed. So great, now you've got a scope. Now you can think about what controls you put in place. And the reality is that while ISO 27001 suggests that you're going to do a risk assessment and then determine what controls to put in place, the reality is you have a whole lot of controls which you've either already put in place or which you have to have in place to meet various compliance requirements. So there's a racing certainty you'll have a firewall. There's a racing certainty you'll have anti-malware software. There's a racing certainty you already have a password policy in place. You may have multi-factor authentication. So in this step 5, what you're doing is you're identifying the controls you have in place and working out why you have them. Are they there because, hey, it's kind of, you know, what we do, it's like having a door with a lock on it? Or is it there because there's a specific contract that requires us to do it? But you identify what we call baseline security controls. They are the controls which are already in place and for which there is a legal and regulatory reason for them to be there. You then ask yourself, which controls are we missing to meet our compliance requirements? So GDPR compliance requirements say you need to have appropriate technical and organizational measures to deal with the risk to personal data. So you should ask yourself, what technical and organizational measures do we have in place? And you might have none. You might not have identified, for instance, how you implement your privacy notice. So those things you've got to do because you're complying with GDPR. So the minimum level of controls, baseline security controls you need to put in place. And you define that, document it, make sure that you have in place what you've documented what you know you've got, and you put in place what you have to meet your various compliance requirements. Now you can proceed to do a risk assessment. And risk assessment is a requirement of ISO 27001. And essentially what you're doing is you're identifying the key assets inside the organization, and you're asking yourself, what vulnerabilities are there around those assets that can be exploited by what threats? And if a threat successfully exploits a vulnerability, what's the likelihood of us suffering a significant impact? And your answer might be, we don't have any threats, or we've got some vulnerabilities, there's no threats for them, in which case there's no risk. Important that you define a risk as a combination of an impact and the likelihood of a threat exploiting a vulnerability. You might say threat can exploit vulnerability, we see that, but impact minimal, likelihood very low, or likelihood very low, impact very high. So you're going to do a risk assessment, quite often using a risk assessment tool, which is designed to identify where you have exposures outside of your baseline security controls. Because it's where you have exposures that you need to roll out additional security controls. Those are the areas in which you need to be investing additional money. You're going beyond simply meeting your compliance requirements. You're dealing with organizational exposures on the basis of your risk appetite. And different organizations have different risk appetites. So small startup businesses might be prepared to take quite big risks. Big organizations might be prepared only to take quite small risks because of the number of people who depend on them. So there are a number of factors that you take into account in considering your risk appetite, but you're going to determine what kind of risk you want. And that helps you think about what controls you're going to put in place as a result of your risk assessment. And it's that set of controls that you determine that you're going to put in place that forms your risk treatment plan. That's we're going to do these things. This role is going to be responsible for implementing that change to an existing control or that rollout of a new control. This is the timetable, this is the budget. That risk treatment plan is fundamentally step 7 in implementing an ISMS. But you're going to do more than just simply roll it out. You're going to, as you roll out those controls, you're going to be beginning to ask yourself, is the control effective? How will I know whether this control, is a kind of mitigation for risk, it's a countermeasure? How do I know this control is going to provide me the protection that we're looking for? How do I know that I'm going to get out of it the level of compliance that we need? How do I know I'm going to be able to thrive as a result of that? So as you're rolling out your risk treatment plan, you should be thinking about how are we going to maintain the competences inside the organization, the skills, the competences in your technology, compliance, business management teams that will enable us to go on developing and managing the ISMS effectively. Step 8, measure, monitor, and review. The whole point about a management system is to make sure it works. So you're going to have an internal audit process. You'll train people on doing internal audits, or you'll hire an external firm like IT Governance to come and do internal audits for you. What you're looking for is an independent view, and the independence could be because you have one department auditing another. As long as everybody's properly trained, that works. What you're looking for is an independent review of the extent to which departments and individuals are complying with the policies and procedures, the risk mitigations that you've put in place. And these are capable of being measured and quantified and can be used to drive improvement. So you can say, okay, in the first 3 months since we rolled out our ISMS, only 50% of people have done the mandatory training. In the next 3 months, we're going to try and get that up to 75%. Lo and behold, you get it to 70%. That enables you to set a target for the following period. So you use measures in order to drive improvement in your management system. The ISMS is not about getting to the point where you have no risk. It's about managing risk through your cyber defense in-depth model as effectively as you can. The final stage, step 9, and this is really the whole point of the exercise, is to get certification, is to go to an external accredited certification body, and there are lots in the UK and elsewhere, and they, for a fee, will do an audit and will give you a certificate which says, as an independent auditor accredited by the UK Accreditation Service, they've audited your management system and it complies with ISO 27001, and they will then come back on a regular basis over the next 3 years to make sure it continues to comply. And it's that badge, that certification badge, that enables you to demonstrate to stakeholders, to customers, to staff, that you take looking after not only personal data, but the assets and processes and operations of your business seriously, and seriously enough to make sure with external verification that you go on doing so. So ISO 27001, logical way, step 3 in level 3 in your cyber defense in depth. But you also need to think about what's happening across your broader supply chain, because you're buying things from organizations, and increasingly you're accessing information through APIs, suppliers are sending you documents, you've got digital interactions, you have the possibility that suppliers might get taken over by a criminal, albeit briefly, long enough to send out phishing emails that look pretty realistic on account of they are. So you need to think about how are we going to drive security through our supply chain? How are we going to build resilience into our supply chain? How are we going to ask our key suppliers maybe to do cyber essentials, to become ISO 27001 certified, to demonstrate to us how they're complying with GDPR? All of those are key elements in building robustness in your supply chain as you move forward into the next 6 to 9 months of potentially challenging economic circumstances. And that, for you, certification for you is a way of demonstrating to your customers that you're taking it seriously. It's also a way in which your suppliers can demonstrate to you that they're taking it seriously. And many major organizations are saying, as part of a condition for an RFP, for instance, supplier must have ISO 27001 as well as 9001 and perhaps other standards. It's a requirement or a regulatory requirement. And so it becomes something which proliferates through the supply chain. It kind of makes sense to do. If you haven't got ISO 27001 certification in place, it makes sense to do it proactively before you're forced to do it, because not only does that mean that you're on the front foot dealing with customers, but it means that you are really on the front foot dealing with your own specific cyber risk. So, a number of ways you can deal with ISO 27001. You can go on a training course, and I'm just showing a sample. We have a huge portfolio of ISO 27001 training courses, lead implementer, foundation, lead auditor, and other that's appropriate for people who want to implement it itself. You can get a gap analysis done. You can have an external partner like IT Governance come and send an experienced consultant who can look at all of the good things you're doing and saying these things already meet ISO 27001 requirements. Here are the areas you don't. This is what it might look like in order for you to meet the standard fully. You can outsource implementation. You can get an implementation specialist to come and help implement the whole of the management system. We have fast track offerings for organizations below 20 employees and for organizations between 21 and 500 employees, where effectively we say to a client, we understand you want to do this, you don't have the resource or expertise, we'll put it together and do it for you. We'll get you to certification, we'll get you beyond certification, we'll be able to manage it for you on an ongoing basis. We'll help you get all of the benefits of ISO 27001 without you having any of the headaches and traumas that can be involved in trying to do it yourself. So lots of ways in which we can help you with cyber defense in depth. But that's all I'm planning to say, folks, to you today. So thank you all for listening. And this is kind of where we move into the Q&A session. If anybody has questions which you would like me to answer, if you do, please, the chat function or the Q&A function, type your question in there and I will pick it up and I'll share the question with you and then I will share an answer. Question, we are looking at ISO 27001, but I'm slightly concerned that it will only be myself working towards it. Is there any training assistance available working towards it? Yes. So we can, you can access training at a foundation ISO 27001 lead implementer level. The lead implementer training course is a 3-day training course delivered by people who've implemented ISO 27001. It takes you through, it draws on all of the experience we've built up over 20 years. It gives very practical, pragmatic, this is how to tackle it. If you're the one person, this is how to get other people involved. This is how to get buy-in from management. This is how to get buy-in from across the business. It's all covered in that ISO 27001 course. We can do more than that. We can provide consultancy support to back you up. We can provide training for other people inside your organization. All of those things are ways in which we can help you tackle ISO 27001. So I hope that's a helpful answer for you there. Folks, any other questions that you might have, do type them into the chat function or the Q&A function, and I will share the answer. If not, I will, in that case, simply say, folks, I hope it's been useful. The 4th and 5th components of this webinar series will be coming up. You can, we'll send you join-up details if you don't have, but please do come back and we'll do everything we can to help you stay secure. Do bear in mind that, as I said, cybersecurity is going to get more and more of a threat and a problem over the months ahead. This is the time when you really do need to be taking appropriate steps to build real defense in depth for your organization so that you can be sure that protecting your assets, staying compliant, you're able to thrive whatever the economic circumstances. Thank you all for being here today. Have a successful rest of the week. Bye-bye.